So I know many of you from us hanging out all day, so we could be somewhat informal. I have enough slides to talk for a long time, but I'll probably keep it to 40, 45 minutes. If that's reasonable, then we can have some time to have questions. I don't know if you're getting CME for the course, but there's some disclosures that I have. When you want to build something, there's fundamentally two ways to do it. You can either start with a block of something and chisel away what you don't want. That's subtractive manufacturing or milling. Or you can build something from the bottom up and add layer by layer at a time until you actually get the thing that you want, and that is additive manufacturing, also known as rapid prototyping, but also known as 3D printing. And the lexicon in medicine is now moving towards using the term 3D printing, although they're not exactly synonyms between the three. There's no question that the best part, if you need to build an airplane, the most important parts of the airplane, you'd much rather have that thing 3D printed than someone sitting there whittling away at it, and it is. And this is actually a 3D printer next to a wing of a Boeing airplane. And a lot of very important parts of your car are 3D printed, and many devices. And so unquestionably, the field of 3D printing has positively impacted every sector that it's entered. And healthcare is always late in sectors for technology, but we always tend to get there. And we've got a lot of regulatory issues. We've got a lot of, it's our health and our safety. And so, all technologies move into healthcare a little bit slower than they do other things. And 3D printing, as you'll see, is moving very, very strongly into the healthcare technology and the healthcare. Hey, thank you. Right there. That's great. Into healthcare technology and the healthcare sector. And I'll show you some of that. So I'm going to talk about 3D printing and imaging, because when it sorts out, 3D printing might be in the domain of radiology, and it might be in the domain of surgery and interventions, because it's still kind of undifferentiated. I mean, it's moving into the field of medicine unquestionably, but whether 3D printing is done by radiologists or not is still in play. And that's why it's important, and I'll show you how societies like the RSNA have been very, very strong, because there's a lot of money in 3D printing. If you go to the Wall Street Journal 3 days ago, there's the feature article is on 3D printing in medicine, talking about how much impact it'll actually have, and it's an extraordinary impact, as I think you'll see. I'll go through some of these other things so you can, and mostly just give you my insights and feelings on the field. And if you like 3D visualization or reformatted types of imaging, or if you like things like advanced cardiac imaging where there's a lot of reformatting, a lot of vascular stuff, a lot of abdominal things, there's a lot of 3D visualization. So just for definition, so volume rendering, MIPS, all of that stuff, everything that you do on a radiology workstation is now called 3D visualization. Anything that you do to create a physical model or to actually create a non-DICOM image, and I'll go into that a little bit, whether you do that through a virtual reality tool, whether you 3D print it, or you do a combined virtual reality 3D printing thing, that's all in the field of 3D printing. So that's the separation between 3D visualization, that terminology, and 3D printing, just so you know. Oh, that's the pointer part doesn't work, just the laser part. Okay, so before I was born, there was, key aspects of dumping barium and looking at lesions in barium that completely revolutionized the way that people looked at medicine, right? And so the idea that you could actually see a polyp because you could outline it with barium and use a fluoroscope completely changed how data was managed in medicine. And this is why we all have a job, right? This was the dawn of, after x-rays, using barium to actually look at things. 1983, this is Marty Lipton's, one of his many papers. He actually worked at the Brigham with me at the end of his career. And the idea that you could actually, this is actually a state-of-the-art cardiac CT, 1983. The concept that you could actually use a CT scanner and visualize a structure that was inside the body like a heart was completely revolutionary. And that L is pointing out, that that's the left ventricle, right? Because no one had ever seen a left ventricle, that was outside of the cath lab in any way, shape, or form. The concept, of taking that piece of data and looking at it was absolutely, completely revolutionary. This is one of the sentinel papers in our field. This is Elliott's picture. And in 1991, the concept that you could actually take a whole set of CT scans and put them electronically together to look at a spine. This is the first reformatted image that's ever been published. Again, no one ever even considered that you could even do that, right? So the idea that you could actually take a data set and look at it on a single image, completely revolutionary and blew people out of the water. And if you read what Elliott said, then it's exactly the same for 3D printing now. So early 3D imaging involves mini computers, blah, blah, blah. Computer workstations live 10 times capacity. You always hear, the computers are getting quicker and quicker, and they're 1/10 the cost. This dramatic decrease in price performance allows the compact, low-cost, fast 3D printing. It used to be that you could buy a 3D printer for $50,000. Now you can buy a 3D printer for $1,000, right? The same thing. Radiologists play a dominant role in the future direction of imaging, say 3D printing, by working closely with their colleagues in radiation therapy, blah, 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 all the same people. So all of those things that happened in 1991 are now happening again, except instead of 3D visualization, we have actual physical models. And we make parts, we make devices, we do surgical planning. So another thing that's happened, and I'm not going to talk about this, I'm kind of working on some concepts, is that one thing that's happened with 3D printing in medicine is, and it happens in radiology as well as many other fields, one thing that's actually happening is that people with an artistic interest are going into medicine to do 3D printing, or they're entering the field. Hospitals with 3D printers are actually hiring artists, right? Because there's a huge artistic component. And so, it used to be that, fascinatingly, there was a lot of technology folks, and the people that were really driving 3D printing were the hardcore technology thing. It's not so much the case. There's a lot of artists and a lot of new artistic license and a lot of new type of thinking that goes into 3D printing. So this is a volume rendering for one of my old fellows, one of my old mentees. I've had, many, almost 100 now mentees that have, gone into, bona fide academic radiology. And, it's pretty artistic. This is a mechanical heart, and this is a CT scan, right? It's completely reformatted and colorized CT scan using Vitria. There's a lot of artistic component. This is Shapour-Dimitri's paper, and recent radiology paper where he's talking about endoleaks and quantitating them. And those volume, there's a lot, you take the arrows out, there's a huge artistic component. And when you actually start to do medical modeling, you realize that you're sculpting things, you're actually building things. When you do a model and you make a model, like you have this artistic sense of when it's done, you're like, yes, don't touch it. It's like you've almost built something. And so there's a lot in the field that is completely new to all medical folks. I think that surgeons generally think that they're artistic, especially people that do stuff like this. But there's a huge, as 3D printing and medical modeling, occupies, 0.1% of medicine to 1% to 5%, and you read the Wall Street Journal to 10%. There are a whole new generation of what I call physician artists, or people that are real artistic senses that are entering the field. So in Boston, I worked very hard. This is my logo of my old lab with Walter Reed, and these are the people that I started doing 3D printing on, actually doing a lot of visualization, and we actually did face transplantation, and that was one of the things that we were known for in our organization. And we were able to actually do reconstructive types of surgeries and actually make 3D printed models and make customized device and patient-specific implants. And there's a large component of 3D printing that lives in the craniomaxillofacial reconstructive surgery. It is very artistic. You can actually make a lot of metal parts. You can actually do a lot of surgical planning with plastics. And there's a large role for surgical planning and taking an operation that could be 20 hours and planning parts of it with 3D printing and medical modeling and shrinking it down to a procedure that's 10 hours. And so there's a huge cost savings. There's a pretty extensive literature that shows that if you actually use medical models in these surgeries, you will not only have better outcome, but you'll save a ton of time and a ton of money and just operative time. Right? So there's unquestionably highly relevant. You can also use 3D printing for physical experiments as well. So this is a coronary artery, and I don't know if people here have heard of CTFFR or heart flow or the types of things where you actually get physiologic information from just straight up anatomical data. Well, you can't actually test those things by taking someone's heart and doing 1,000 scans on them, right? But you can take someone's coronary arteries. This is just a 3D printed model of someone's coronary artery. You put valves on it. You can put this thing in your CT scanner, and then you can run contrast through that, through an entire flow loop, and you can scan this 1,000 times, no problem. And all of those things that get validated, they actually are going to get validated they're already being validated through 3D printed models. But you can actually take whatever you need to go from the patient into the CT scanner or into even an MR scanner if it's a compatible material, and actually run that. So there's a huge piece of this medical modeling that actually fits into the scientific arena. And this is from some of my graduate students and former graduate students, and they literally just had, I don't know, it was like 16 papers that were accepted to the next SPI for doing medical modeling and simulations. I think those acceptances came out just a few days. As opposed to 5 of them were last year and 2 the year before. So the exponential growth is pretty apparent. So some just key observations. Certainly 3D visualization is important. We do it every day. 3D printing is the next step on that, just the way that you went from doing the CT scan, looking at the slice, to doing 3D visualization, you hold the model. It has artistic overtures, and clear communication and simple guidelines are important. So these are the people that are important in the field. These are Scott. This is the head of Stratasys. This is Andy Christensen, my good friend. He was the head of a company called Medical Modeling. Medical Modeling was recently bought by 3D Systems. And so those are the two of the major players, Stratasys and 3D Systems. They both have pretty strong verticals in medicine now. These are companies that traditionally have sold their technologies to non-medical people, but now have a very, very strong healthcare sector. And this is Chuck Hall, and interesting story about Hideko Kodama, which you can read there. We'll get into some of the politics and the history of 3D printing. It's an interesting field. So how do you do it? Right? So what are the options? There's basically 3 ways that you can do 3D printing. The first way is you did what I used to do, which was just have collaborations. And so you hook up with a company, you hook up with a government agency, and I hooked up with Walter Reed. Walter Reed has one of the most sophisticated 3D printing facilities in the world. They're in Bethesda. They're part of the United States Department of Defense. The face transplant grant that we had was part of the Department of Defense, so I was able to use all the facilities at Walter Reed however I wanted. That's how I learned how to do it. You can actually do it in a hospital. And I think people know in Canada that the Otto Hospital has a 3D printing lab, just like the Mayo Clinic. They're the 2 of the major places that actually have in-hospital 3D printing. And you can also outsource it. You will 3D print here, unquestionably. I mean, it's just a matter of time. As soon as it becomes reimbursed, you obviously will 3D print. But you'll do it to whatever extent you do it now, you probably do it and you don't realize it, because surgeons are working with people to get the models that they need now, and it might not be going through the radiology department. That will have serious fiscal implications in your career down the road. But for right now, since it's not being reimbursed, no one, it's probably not on your radar screen that people are doing this. But you will 3D print cases from radiology, or someone will. There'll be, you're not going to 3D print everything, but you're going to 3D print cases where the model will actually help the physician do the intervention, for example, or that you'll actually need something customized, or you'll need a patient-specific part, or you'll need a plate for a skull, or you'll need something for a hip, and someone in the hospital will realize that we actually have a budget of $6.8 million to get all these parts from these companies. We can actually make these parts for $6.6 million, save the $200,000, have everything here, and lo and behold, everything will switch over. It's just a matter of when that happens, right? And the difference isn't $200,000. The difference is many, many millions of dollars, because companies that make these devices and make models, they charge a lot more money than they actually cost. So this is actually, there are two small MakerBot machines actually in the Ottawa library, right? And then we have our full-fledged 3D printing lab. But these are students. This is one of my students in Ottawa. These are some of the other students. And if you go, they're running all the time. So the medical students are making models. This is just a very simple. It's like it's a very simple printer. It's basically, I'm not going to get into printer technology with you guys, but it's basically taking a glue gun and gluing. The glue gun does one level. But just before it dries, so the next level can stick on, it does the next level. And you have plastic medical models that you can use to teach anatomy. You can use these to show patients for patient consent. The sky's the limit. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of models all over the library. This is Dimitri Mitsaris. This is actually my old lab. A different type of printer. This one uses UV light to actually photocure a resin. This is Elizabeth George and Angie Tang. She's a resident and going to be a resident in radiology. And with low cost, this was done through Dimitri's K Award, an NHK Award that I sponsored, I don't know, it's been 6 or 7 years ago. Able to, low cost, make all kinds of models and deliver them. These are some of the face transplant models, but every one of these was a case that went to the OR where the interventionist or the surgeon used the model and said, I can't do it. You can't do the case without it. Like, no one will touch a Pancoast tumor. No surgeon will touch a Pancoast tumor the day after you give them the first model. No hepatic surgeon will actually touch a cross segment liver resection the day after you give them the model. They say, I have to have that model or I'm not doing the case, right? And next thing you know, you'll have a huge library of models. So Andrea mentioned there has been a lot of educational opportunities. So I pitched 3D printing as a program at RSNA in 2013, and it's gone very, very well. There's educational courses every year. Now that it started out with just literally like 90 minutes of sessions, now there's a large component of, and I'll talk a little bit more about RSNA in a second, but there's a large component of 3D printing in the annual meeting. There are I think it's probably 450 minutes of didactic courses. There's an entire, there are sessions of abstracts. And there's hands-on courses where you can actually learn how to do the modeling. Because the key thing is that a 3D printer does not recognize DICOM. Like, if you send a DICOM image to a 3D printer, the 3D printer will just laugh at you. It has no idea what a DICOM image is, right? Because a DICOM image is not a closed surface. It's our way of looking at data, but it's not the 3D printing way of looking at data. Now, that's going to change over time, but right now, that's not the way it works. You have to take a DICOM data set and convert it into another file format. The most common one's called an STL, or Standard Tessellation Language format. And so that's why I said the people that like to play with data, you have to manipulate that. Here we're making a patch that went into a kid with a VSD. You have to be able to manipulate that data. So a lot of the hands-on courses teach people how to actually get from a DICOM state to an STL file or something that you can actually print, and all the things with that. And there's this is the journal 3D Printing in Medicine, doing very well in its second year now. Still not on PubMed, but there's a lot that has to go into getting a journal actually on PubMed. I started this journal 2 years ago to actually put together, it's a Springer Open journal, to put together all of the different sources and have a way that people can kind of come together and develop literature in 3D printing in medicine, and hopefully keep it within our domain and within radiology. This is 3D printing in medicine. You can buy the book on Amazon. It hasn't come out yet, but it should be coming out sometime in October. And it talks about things like making an STL file. So this is actually a DICOM image that was converted into STL, and you see all the tiny little triangles in the closed surface. This is actually an STL file. This is a file format that you can send to the 3D printer and you can give to the maxillofacial surgeon, and they can actually drive a screw through it if it's the right material, or do whatever it is and practice whatever they need to do actually on the model before going into the patient. And like I said, as soon as you give them one, prepare to be giving them for life, right? Because that's just the way that it changes everything. And of course, this is relatively normal. What you want to have is you want to have one side that has the disease on it, and I'll show you different examples where the models are used. So this is a cardiac baffle. This is one of those Pancoast tumors. The best that we can do right now is this, right? And give a good report. Like we have to give these types of images, are simply not going to make it. As soon as you actually give someone the ability, the video might not work. Oh, shucks. As soon as, yep. This stent deploys. As soon as you give the cardiologist a chance to actually pick the stent and deploy something that's actually in the model, they'll always do that first. This was considered to be unresectable. As soon as we actually gave the model the tumors in black, you can see the aorta and the ribs. As soon as we actually had that, they went after the case and said they can do it. It's invariably the second that the surgeon gets the thing in their hand, they say, okay, now I understand the case, and that's it. And they'll never look at the images again. It's just a matter of how that's actually going to happen, right? So this is Sejun Yunis from Sick Kids, and he has a fantastic library of congenital heart disease. The only way to really learn and understand congenital heart disease is to 3D print it. The reason that it's so hard and so many few people can do it is they don't actually hold it in their hands. It's actually malpractice to do a complex congenital heart case without a model first. In fact, in a trial, to actually do the multi-center randomized trial, no one will sign up for the trial because it's unethical to actually do the case without the model. So it's really, gotten to the point where it even can't be proven. And there are now good 3D printing lab at Boston Children's. Yoon has a lab, and so same thing with Texas Children, Phoenix Children. So all major children's hospitals that have heart now have 3D printing labs by necessity because they can't do their work without them. They're not reimbursed, they just have the lab, right? So, that's one thing where, the rubber hit the road and they said, okay, there's no reimbursement, we just have a lab. So, that's just, they just, all these places have labs that are run and, run by people that are good in training and understand and I've worked with for a long time. So, cost of reimbursement are why many people don't do it, but that will change over time. The reimbursement will come. 3D printing is so much cheaper than it used to be, and that's one of the major drivers why, part of it is that, people are creative, they have a 3D printer in their garage anyway, and they happen to be a doctor. And people like orthopedic surgeons are tinkerers, right? And there's no question, orthopedic surgeons have 3D printers. They have them. They have them in their office. They use them. What the landscape looks like will be very, very interesting. All hospitals will eventually have a medical 3D printing committee. Whenever you have something that costs a lot of money, you need a committee, you need to make decisions. And so that's an important thing to do. And then I'm not going to talk about bioprinting. This is Alex Afelian, my friend, who does a lot of bioprinting, but it's not even remotely far-fetched to think that we're going to bioprint. You can bioprint vessels now. The company Organovo can do heart valves. It's completely within realm of printing organs in everyone on this side of the room's career. Unquestionably, there will be bioprinting in your lifetime and in your field, and there will be parts that are actually printed. There are now. They're just they're just not in humans yet. So in this role, you have a service where you do the imaging, you send everything to the company, and you get the model. So that's what you do now. I'm sure that your hospital does this now. You do the imaging, and then someone makes the STL file, hopefully in the radiology department, and does the modeling, and then ships it out, and then you get the part back. Or the orange line is you do it all in-house. You have the imaging, you do the segmentation, you make the STL file, you actually print it in the hospital or near the hospital, and you have the finished model and you use it. So those are the three pathways. You either outsource everything, which is what you're currently doing, or you do part of it, hopefully within the radiologist do this, or you just do the whole thing internally. And ultimately, it's cheaper to do the whole thing along the orange line and do it internally. And so the nice thing about outsourcing is you can use all kinds of resources. I'm not going to go into the printing at all. I'm going to maybe talk to you for 15 more minutes so we can open it up for questions. There's pluses and minuses of all of these different things. If you ship everything out, you don't have the clinical collaboration, you don't have the back and forth between your surgeons to do the tough cases, your lead times are a lot longer, but you get to use all the different tools, you get to use all the different expertise, you have to pay way more money, of course. And it's just a matter of where you start in the process when you actually go into the medical modeling field. So I'll give you some examples. So Megan Coakley runs the 3D Print Exchange at NIH, and so when you actually make an STL file, if you're interested, you take a DICOM, you make an STL, you can actually upload it into a Print Exchange, and I've actually started a lexicon. I'll talk a little bit more about RSNA. Started a lexicon and an organizational system. It's basically radiology organ-based system. So you can actually take your case and upload it into the right place. And you can also go to Print Exchange and actually get STL files and print them. So if you go to, buy a 3D printer, a $500 3D printer at Canadian Tire, wherever you're going to go, you can actually go to NIH for free, get the STL files, and you can print it there. So you can play around with stuff. I mean, you could also print, Christmas ornaments, you can print keychains, you can print stuff for your family, and they'll all be very appreciative. But if you want to print a heart, you can go to Print Exchange and print a heart without having to segment it, right? This is Yoon's library, that's the host library. There's also a medical imaging bank. I haven't worked with these guys much. They send me an email every 15 minutes, but I haven't gotten around to getting back to them yet. But most robust one is the Print Exchange. So what did RSNA do? RSNA, realizing that 3D printing was going to be important, they launched something called the Special Interest Group, which took about half my blood volume, but I'll explain what it is. So and you can join, you're a member of RSNA, you can join this now. So RSNA has a Special Interest Group, the SIG. It's a separate membership within RSNA. So RSNA has never had a separate membership within. When you're a member of RSNA, you're a member of everything in RSNA. But what RSNA has done is spin out, this is the first one, what's called the Special Interest Group for 3D printing. They'll probably, based on how we do over the years, they'll probably decide to do something like one in spectroscopy, one in, high-end, whatever it is, ablation of whatever. So the Special Interest Group is a separate ticket. You pay $40 in addition to your RSNA membership, and you become a member of the Special Interest Group. And that Special Interest Group gives you access to the Special Interest Group meetings. We met 4 times last year, actually live face-to-face meetings. We just had a meeting on August 31st, a day-long meeting with the Food and Drug Administration, hosted at the FDA, paid for by the FDA, internationally telecast by the FDA, and they're very highly engaged. The one before that, we had a meeting, actually it was at Rapid. The Special Interest Group met there in Pittsburgh, and before that we met actually in Arizona, where it was warm in March. And so there's very high engagement. Right now there's about 170 RSNA members who are also members of the Special Interest Group. The other thing that I did that was, I think, beneficial, but time will tell, is that RSNA opened up a new category of membership. And that new category of membership allows industry members to actually join RSNA and then join the Special Interest Group. So if you're working for a company and you're in the medical modeling domain, or you're working for a 3D printing company, now you can actually join RSNA. You have to pay the full membership for RSNA, and then you can actually join the Special Interest Group that way. And so it's actually attracted a lot of people to become RSNA members that were not RSNA members. And this is the launch of it actually in 2016. It's the launch of the Special Interest Group. And you know the little books, people, who here has been to RSNA? When you go to RSNA, there's these pamphlets, and so you follow the tract. You get a book that says neuro, a book that says cardiac, a book that says that says GI, GU. There's now a book that says 3D printing. These are the number of papers that actually has come out of each place. If you total it all up, I think the most is actually in Europe, but North America is doing pretty well. And there's a lot of 3D printing in Asia, a lot. And this is medical modeling. This is one of my residents, Leo Shepler. This guy is a brilliant guy. He does a lot of semantics and a lot of, this is a heat map of the different types of things that are within 3D printing. And if you look at some of the things, you have a lot of intensity work in terms of polymers and reactives, and surgical equipment is red, microsurgery. So if you look at where we are in the field, you can kind of get an idea with these types of heat maps of what's being published and kind of what's a hot topic. We've worked really hard to use the word 3D printing and to eliminate the words rapid prototyping and additive manufacturing from the medical literature. It's just a pain in the butt, is the bottom line. Like, if you want to learn the history of MRI, you actually have to PubMed nuclear magnetic resonance, right? So the concept of having all different ways of saying things is a disaster, and we have to avoid that. So you're a physician or you're in the medical field, just use the word 3D printing so we just don't have to deal with that anymore. These are the number of papers, and just to kind of give you an idea, orthopedics is big, vascular is big, cardiac is big in terms of, and most models actually come from CT scans, but you can actually 3D print from MR. You can actually take the DICOMs and segment them out. This is an example for cardiac, and I'm just talking about the image acquisition itself. Then remember I talked about the segmentation and creating that STL file. You're not done at that point. You have to use CAD or computer-aided design, because once you have an STL file, it's still not ready. You can have parts of it that have to be eliminated. It can have holes, which are non-anatomical things that won't be recognized by the printer. You can actually have a set of DICOM images and have a vessel wall, and the wall thickness be 0. Right? But you can't tell that to a 3D printer, because you can't 3D print 0. You have to 3D print something. So there's all kinds of different types of modeling that needs to happen before you actually hit the button. The next 20 or so slides are examples of things that have been 3D printed and why. I can make the residents. I'll actually show you a case like this tomorrow, so I won't tell you. This is a patient with HOCM. If you're going to do a myomectomy here, there's no way a surgeon will want to do a complex myomectomy until they have the model. They see what they're going to cut out. The surgeon can cut it out if it's the right material. And there's all kinds of investment in different materials. You can print the valves. You can deploy different types of stents and different things in the cardiac domain. This is a TAVR where you're actually practicing, actually deploying the thing. Not only that, but you can actually 3D print the valve, so it actually custom fits. You can either print the titanium struts and lay the pig thing and lay the actual valve material on it, or you can 3D print the entire thing. There's a huge business now in actually 3D printing the mitral domain as that enters the field. These are implantation. These are all different publications in the field. This is not, I'm taking things from the literature now. Everything I showed you before was our own stuff, but I'm taking literature stuff. Some of these are our own cases that are in the literature, but you can actually 3D print something. You can deploy the stent, 3D print the stents. This is a patient with an LVOT. I talked about the congenital stuff, and so all congenital cases are 3D printed, hands down. If you have a simple ASD, VSD, PDA, you don't need to 3D print it. You can actually go in and correct it with a good MR. Anything else needs to be 3D printed, unquestionably. 3D printing, we talked a lot today with the residents about surgical replacement for aortic disease, aneurysm replacement, 3D printing complex cases before you actually go after, looks like it's going to be some kind of weird splenic artery aneurysm. Before you clip it, you can actually do the thing. You can hook it up to the flow pump, do the hemodynamics. You can 3D print all kinds of cages and devices. I'm not going to get into the whole bioprinting thing, but you can actually start to think about printing the valves. You can actually print sensor devices and put them on the myocardium to determine when there's going to be an arrhythmia. And then you can print the actual device to correct the arrhythmia, and it perfectly fits on the myocardium. You can put that in sensor devices in stents. You can 3D print a stent with a sensor device to look at the hemodynamics and see a myocardial infarction before the infarction happens, because you actually can have a customized sensor within the coronary arteries. Any type of, this is the picture that's on the RSNA website. Any type of complex surgery that you're going to do, whether in the craniomaxillofacial domain, can be 3D printed. You can print in different colors and plastics. You can do the arteries and the veins, and you can give them to the surgeons ahead of time. This is a 3D printing of a metallic plate to cover a defect. Pre-bending, Taking a metal plate in the operating room and trying to bending it and cutting yourself up, and from the surgeon's perspective, is a complete non-starter. These are all 3D printed now. It's virtually malpractice to do it any other way. You can actually do a patient that's had a gunshot wound or an MVA. You can actually go to old photographs, or you can do a photograph of the other side, a digital photograph, and actually contour out what, from the normal side, the one that's not injured, or the one with not the tumor, what the reconstruction would look like. Then you can overlay the rotational photography on the CT scan and plan out the surgery. We make ears this way. We make parts of faces this way. You can reconstruct the soft tissues this way. You can, with different tricks, you could take printers that are actually pretty cheap, and you could do different tricks like take the material, the resin, and over or underexpose it in certain ways so it looks like the nerves, and so you can actually show where the nerves are. There's a huge dental application in 3D printing. I mean, most dental devices right now are 3D printing. I don't even know how many hundreds of millions of dollars the business is, but it's gigantic. All of these devices that you use to actually cut or to remold things, when someone has a bad maxillofacial injury, they take a piece of fibula out and they're bending it in the OR. It takes hours and hours, and then they're figuring out how to cut it. So what you do is you 3D print the thing the cookie cutter, the thing that you need to cut. And so when you actually put the fibula down in the OR, you have the thing you've 3D printed the device. It cuts the fibula in 15 seconds, and you put it in the patient, and it fits perfectly. Otherwise, you sit there for 8 hours and bend it. It doesn't fit. You overcut it. Then you have to take out the other fibula. The whole thing's an absolute blood show. So, I mean, it's very simple. You just take the device. You 3D print the device that you want to use to actually cut the tissue that you want. You cut it like a cookie cutter. It fits perfectly, and you finish the case. Any patient with a congenital skull abnormality, they're all 3D printed, and you just practice on the thing that you do. And there's a bazillion of them. I'll show you some. All complex skull-based surgeries are now 3D printed. Like, you will not get away with doing a complex aneurysm, or no surgeon will touch this case until it's 3D printed. And you can 3D print it. You can actually set it up with vasculature. You can make blood flow through it. You can actually print it in multiple different materials, and no one will touch a case, without a model at this point. Heterotopic ossification is another thing, like complex fractures, complex heterotopic ossification, where they're going to go after this. They always make a model first now, and they cut into it, and they will actually do the surgery, at the dry bench before they actually go after that type of complex case. And these kinds of things are, absolute no-brainers. Like, if you're going to actually fix something and you're going to use an old-fashioned type of device, you don't have to 3D print this. You can use the old-fashioned rings and slings and different things to put everything together. But you always put it together on a plastic version of the thing, or a hard plastic bone, and then you screw it on and make sure it's going to fit first. Ideally, you 3D print this too, and so everything will work. But you can do it in different stages. Surgeons don't have access to this type of material, but almost everyone can 3D print in the plastic. So you 3D print the plastic first. Any complex vascular case or knee reconstruction, you're going to 3D print. And lots and lots of complex fractures will better off 3D printed. People saw on the news, like, we make, for kids that have parts, like the kid that didn't have the hand, we can make like a prosthetic hand for them. We can make a splint for $20 for them instead of having it be $200. And the kid grows out of it. You can just make them a new one. Those artificial parts are extraordinarily expensive. The concept of doing this and putting these cheap models in underprivileged countries and actually being able to actually give medical care where you completely couldn't give it is completely revolutionizing. There's a lot of crowdsourcing, a lot of funding going into doing that, and just it's amazing who just doesn't have a splint that will fit their broken hand. It's mind-bogglingly shocking. People don't, so the Wounded Warriors Project, people don't have ears, people don't have parts, and so you can just custom made them all. And they, again, using the rotational photography to look at the other side and just make the model. So I'll wind it up. Medical 3D printing has been around for a long time, but now it's come to play because the technology is cheaper, right? And so you do reconstructive surgeries and all these different things, and they're all done with models now. You just don't realize it because other people are doing it, which is the problem. Increased utilization secondary to lower cost. there's 11 million now a year invested into medical applications, and all of the trends, like if you read the Forbes or the Wall Street Journal just from the last few years, we're looking at roughly $9 billion industry for us. And so unquestionably, data showing there's fewer intraoperative complications, fewer postoperative. You save a ton of money from the hospital administrative time and OR time and costs. And the other thing that you are going to save a ton of money in the hospital is you're never going to stock tons and tons of devices. So right now at our hospital, we have at any one time, there's $5 million of unused stuff just sitting, waiting to be used. You can get rid of all of that, just 3D print what you need when you need it. And every day, you will save that overhead. Personalized medicine is 3D printing. Like, you could say whatever you want about personalized medicine. There's only one way to personalize something, and that's the 3D print it. You're not going to bend it or spit on it and shine up with your finger and say it's personalized. When you actually take something that fits the patient, that's what's personalized. Everybody else is totally bogus. Enhanced aesthetic and reconstructive surgery, you can make it. You could avoid unnecessary surgery. You will improve your relationship with your patients enormously, and tons and tons of applications in anatomic training and training models. So I think people recognize that the technology is important, and people are starting to have 3D printing labs. They're kind of small and growing, and they're niche people, and they're people that are interested in art and people that are interested in engineering. There's a big role in cardiovascular, which is kind of and the face transplant stuff is how I got it. And then to get to reimbursement, it takes a lot. Right now we have tons of case reports and people doing it. People that have done 3D printing have typically been people that work in their garage, right? It's just the way that the culture has defined itself. Don't ask why. It doesn't have to be that way, but that's just the way it worked itself out. And so it's hard to get here, but this is the direction that you have to go to get reimbursed in Canada, US, or anywhere else. And so, I don't know about modality is probably not the right word, but so 3D printing is the way that you will visualize and use big data in patients in the future. Like, the best thing you can do now is look at it on a 2D screen. That what will happen is that the technology, and I'm not going to talk about virtual reality or augmented reality, but it's very similar with the same type of files. Like, the best way that you can take the data, 10 years ago was to show a slice through something. Now you can show a volume. Now you can actually see that volume or actually hold that volume. And so these are the things that are important, and the cost of the technology, like every other technology, is going to keep going down and down and down. And we need to do classification and guideline. RSNA's really, really, really stepped up to the plate, kind of in a big way, which has been terrific. And if you're interested, you can join the special interest group. There's nothing stopping you from doing it. If you're an RSNA member, pay your $40, you're part of the special interest group. You can email me if you like. This is the website for the journal. That's a Twitter handle. I may or may not reply to that, but try to reply to everything that I get. And I do answer all my emails. So if you email me, I will answer you. Might not answer you today or tomorrow, but I will get to you for sure, and do my best to answer you guys. And so, good timing. 40 minutes will be good.